Hey everybody, how you doing? And welcome to another episode of the John Riley Project. It's episode number 336 of this podcast. This is a podcast all about our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Tomorrow is Independence Day, Declaration of Independence. So this is a great time to be an American and to celebrate really what I believe are the moral footings of what makes America special. And that is individual rights and our right to our own life. And so thanks for joining me on the podcast, on the live stream. If you have thoughts or comments, just let me know. You can drop your take in the live chat on Facebook, X, or on YouTube. How you doing? You hope you're all surviving out there. I have a bunch of things in store for you today. We're going to start local. I've got some comments about what's going on around here in Poway, about the term limit initiative in Poway. We have some comments about Poway Voices, which is a group that is largely trying to stop development, slow down development, stop the Lifetime Fitness facility. We're going to talk a little bit about Poway Voices. And just some of the general reactions in the community to all of that. And then I want to widen the scope. We'll talk a little bit about general kind of national news. I want to talk about the presidential debate between Biden and Trump and the reaction and the fallout. And, this has all been swirling for the past week. I've got a bunch of thoughts and opinions on that. And then I'm going to briefly touch on a few of the Supreme Court cases and give you my opinion. If you're interested in that, I'm certainly interested in your opinion. So let me know. And then what I like to do is just share with you really some Independence Day memories, which is kind of goes back to my childhood, things that I remembered on the 4th of July. And so I encourage you to share your stories about Independence Day as well. So if you have any thoughts or comments, you want to get involved in the conversation, just type your comments in the live chat on Facebook, X, or on YouTube, and we'll get you involved. Okay, so starting local, then we're going to talk about Poway, then we're going to talk about national issues, and then we'll talk about Independence Day. Okay, let's kick it off, and let's talk a little bit about the Poway Term Limit Initiative. And I just want to bring people up to speed on this particular issue. We had talked about the term limit initiative that Tony Blaine was putting forward, and this initiative has now been suspended. He thinks that he's not going to be able to get enough signatures. And in fact, like I told you, I'm on his text messaging list, which is an interesting list to get involved in because his messages are so personal. It makes you think like he's just talking to you, but he's really talking to everybody. But Tony Blaine said on June 23rd, stop signatures. We're not going to make the 4,000 signature deadline by July 30th. I'm going to refile now to restart the 6-month clock in September, and we'll get 4,000 signatures and put it on the 2026 ballot. Interesting. So Tony Blaine is still going to run for office, and I think he's running in District 2, if I recall. And he's going to be running against Jared Wilson, who is another kind of outspoken Poway guy who played a role in the last election, part of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. And he was on Jared Wilson was chairing the Budget Review Committee. He's a pretty interesting guy. A lot of people had a lot of problems with a lot of the PACs and the money in politics in Poway. And he's going to be running against Tony Blaine. And Tony Blaine, of course, announced his candidacy before the 2022 election. That's how far ahead of the curve he was. And my understanding is that he is in the reserves and he is serving on a mission right now, and he's not here locally. So he had to get someone else to file his candidate papers for his District 2 election. But if he's not here, then he's obviously not gathering a lot of signatures for the Poway Term Limits Initiative. And so it turns out they're not going to have enough. And in this, it's disappointing. I mean, I'd like to see term limits. I think, a lot of times the incumbents get into office, particularly in local elections, and they're there for like not just years, sometimes decades. And I always like to see some fresh blood. I hope this thing gets resurrected. If Tony is successful and wins his election, that'll help him probably bring this initiative more towards the front of the list on things that are being discussed in Poway. And we're going to break down all these elections as we get closer into the election season. Generally speaking, our local elections start to get hot and heavy like around Labor Day, and go in through, the mid to end of October. Usually by then, everyone has voted with their mail-in votes. So the term limit campaign has been suspended. So let me know what you think of that. Do you like term limits? Do you think term limits are a good idea? Or maybe they're a bad idea because we get to vote and we can always kick out an incumbent, and maybe our regular voting process is good enough for term limits. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. Okay, I want to now switch a little bit to another local topic, and I want to talk a little bit about the Poway Voices Facebook group. And this is kind of an expansion on what Chris Cruz has done with her South and North Poway Votes group. It's kind of a community leaders, and this Poway Voices piece is really trying to address the tremendous amount of development that's going on in Poway that has so many people upset. Whether it's the development on Poway Road, or it's the development at the farm in Poway, or it's development along Twin Peaks, there's been a lot of housing construction, and a lot of people are angry about it. They don't want to see any more of it. They want Poway to be like it was in 1972. And so we're seeing more kind of heated propaganda coming out from a lot of anti-growth people, anti-housing, anti-development, really upset with the Poway Lifetime Fitness Project. And as a result, we saw in the Poway Voices group, Chris Cruz explaining the history of Prop FF in Poway, which goes back to the late 1980s, when our, quote, founding fathers of Poway, Bob Emery and the whole group there back in the 80s, had wanted to prevent Poway from becoming like another Claremont or another Mira Mesa. And so they had put forward a ballot initiative to make certain portions of Poway that you couldn't change the zoning just by the city council voting on it. In order to change zoning laws in Poway, they wanted the people to weigh in. And as a result, this has caused a lot of issues in Poway. There's been a lot of development that hasn't occurred in North Poway, because that's where a lot of this zoning was applied for Prop FF. And then, of course, on Poway Road and other places, Prop FF didn't apply, which I thought was odd. You think it would apply to the whole city. But at any rate, just bringing up Prop FF and where you can build, where you can't build, property rights, etc., was kind of broken down by Chris Cruz. And I just kind of felt it was necessary to say again what I think is really an important issue. And you'll see it on the screen. I commented that zoning laws like Prop FF, which prevent development and are pervasive throughout the state, are why we have a housing crisis. And in my opinion, this is very true, because NIMBYs have been resisting development. And this has been going on for a long time, like for decades in California, particularly in the last 2 decades, where there's been resistance to housing. And we've seen housing prices go through the roof, not just for purchasing real estate, but also for rentals. And it's because there's not enough inventory. And I think sometimes people just don't understand that. But we got a response here from Eric Weller, who's one of the leaders of the Poway Voices group. And he said, John, I would think that homes being used for the single highest source of investment and income, thereby driving up rents and mortgage beyond people's means, and often by investors only looking to make money, is why we have a housing crisis, or at least in the top 2 or 3 reasons. Now, this is what you see a lot in a lot of issues that are going on in society, where people are in denial about market forces and supply and demand and the behavior of what people do in an economy. Here again, blame the rich, blame the investors, blame greedy people. Okay, I want to break this down because this is important to understand. Are property owners jacking up the price of their house? Yeah, well, because the market is such. You can get a lot more for your house now than you did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago. And at the same time, rental prices are sky high. San Diego is one of the most expensive cities to live in the world because of our housing crisis. Prices are just insane. The reason is because when you go looking to buy a house, there are very few available for sale. When you go to rent an apartment or rent a house, it's not like you have a selection of 20 or 30 of them in a particular community. There are very few available. So it's natural for property owners and landlords to, they set their prices based on the market conditions. Just like if you were going to try to sell your house, you're going to try to maximize the price that you get for that house. And if it turns into a bidding war amongst buyers as a seller, you're going to say, okay, great, because that's what the market condition is. But it seems that for some reason, people lose sight of that. They just think it's just greed, 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 when in fact, people that are property owners today are going to maximize the sale of their house. The thing is that when there is not enough inventory on the market, and real estate agents will tell you this, when there's not enough listings available on the market, you get 10 or 20, potential buyers all bidding on that one property because there's so few available. That's why they get into bidding wars. That's why homes are selling above asking price. And the same dynamic exists with rentals. So, is it because, as Eric said, that homes are being used as the single highest source of investment? Well, first of all, that's been true for a long time, but we haven't seen prices radically increase, except like in the past, probably 10 to 20 years, right? But homes have been people's major nest egg for middle-class Americans going back decades, going back to when I was a kid and before that. Have investors owned property in the past? Yeah. Do they own more property now? Yeah. I looked it up. Apparently, 25% of properties in San Diego are owned by investors. That seemed really high to me. I don't know if that's 25% of the recent purchases or 25% of all property. It's got to be the recent ones. But you might have to ask yourself a question. Why are investors getting involved in real estate? Well, the reason is because the return on investment is so great. Investors love this because the prices are going up, up, up. The value of the property is increasing. If they're renting it out, they can get more for the rent. Investors are benefiting from the NIMBY regulation laws like Prop FF, like, some of the other initiatives that are being discussed in other cities. When government officials and authorities restrict the amount of development that can occur, then existing property owners enjoy the fruits of all of that. We're the ones that enjoy, skyrocketing prices. And so investors are just getting on the bandwagon, and the system is rigged for them, particularly when government restricts development and thus limits supply. So in my opinion, yeah, are investors playing a role here in the housing crisis in San Diego? Yeah. Are people have a lot of money, of their own money, tied up in their homes? Yeah. But if there was a lot more inventory, a lot more competition in the market, then you're going to put more, how should I say, more power in the hands of the real estate buyer or of the renter. When they have a wide range of choices to select from, then those landlords, those property owners are going to have to adjust their price to meet market conditions. So if you go back and look at the source of the river on how we ended up here, it's because there's been so much resistance to housing development in Poway, in San Diego, throughout California, and frankly, in a lot of parts around America. So it's just funny how this myth seems to continue to be pervasive. That it's greed, it's rich people, it's investors, but no, it's just the market conditions. And if you were a landlord, if you were a property owner, I'll bet you any money that you would want to get maximum value for your property. So we'll see how this all thing continues. The Poway Lifetime Fitness Project is going to go before the Poway City Council on July 16th. And we're going to hear from our city council members. I don't know if city officials are going to offer their recommendation on that particular project, but we're going to find out more about that soon. I'm generally I'm in favor of the Lifetime Fitness in the farm in Poway for a number of reasons. Number one, in my opinion, property owners should be able to build on their land, their property, their choice. At the same time, I think it looks like a pretty nice facility with a lot of amenities and services that are interesting to me and my family. And we've commented on that. And I think it's also going to be a nice upgrade. So I'm generally in favor of it, but it's probably going to have to go to a vote. We're going to see a vote on this at some point. That's assuming the city council in Poway, takes the recommendations and then does their due diligence, but they're likely not going to just rubber stamp it and approve it. They're going to put it out to the voters. And then we're going to find out. My hunch is that even though Measure P, passed in 2020, my hunch is this is going to fail because the voters are upset because they voted on one plan and now Kevin McNamara wants to change the plan. I think voters in general are just upset about all the development going on in Poway, and this is their one opportunity where they can say no. So we'll see. I mean, I think the burden is going to be on Lifetime to make a compelling case. It's definitely going to be a high-end fitness facility that it's not going to be like a 24-hour fitness with really low subscription prices. This is going to cater to wealthy people. And those wealthy people aren't going to be the only ones voting on it. We're going to have people all over the city voting on whether or not this facility should go in North Poway. Tell me what you think of this. Drop your comment in the live chat on Facebook, on YouTube, or on X. And by the way, I'm still getting hate from a lot of people here in my hometown, kind of expressing what I believe is a righteous position. I talk about how this podcast is all about our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your life is yours. This is the 4th of July, when this is a great time to talk about this. Your life is yours. In my opinion, your body is yours. That's why I support a woman's right to choose. And I think your property is yours to build on, as long as you're not harming other people. If we're just building housing, we're building a fitness facility, you're building a grocery store. Those are things that property owners should be able to decide for themselves. So let me know your thoughts on that. But, there's still a lot of people that just are upset when I express my thoughts and opinions. But, when I created this podcast a number of years ago, I knew that I was going to get pushback from people that didn't like me, didn't agree with me, but that's okay. I'm trying to create a platform for a community forum. I'm trying to create a discussion, and we're going to sometimes agree and sometimes disagree, and we're going to hear it out. And I think that's a healthy thing for our city, for our community, and I hope you feel the same. Okay. All right. So before we get I want to talk about the debates and what's going on with Trump and Biden. We're going to talk about Independence Day. But I do want to just give a quick shout out for PowayStore.com. I mean, if you're interested in any Poway gear, go to PowayStore.com. And there we've got t-shirts, puzzles, coffee mugs, a lot of other Poway swag, all celebrating our, quote, city in the country. So if you like to check it out, go to PowayStore.com and use the promo code Poway20 to get 20% off. Okay, so now let's take a look. And I got to talk about this debate. Did you see it? Did you see the debate last week? I think it was on Thursday. This was a train wreck of epic proportions. We knew going into this debate that it was going to be different. There wasn't going to be a live audience that Trump was going to feed off of. Apparently, they were going to cut off microphones so it couldn't be a shouting match of people talking over each other. And at first I thought, okay, this could be interesting. This might end up being a real discussion. And then they come out on stage, and I was wondering if Biden and Trump were going to shake hands. And of course they didn't. They went right to their podium. And we got started with this. And in the first moment or two, I was thinking to myself, hey, this is actually working out pretty good. Trump seems sort of well-behaved, and maybe there'll be a substantive discussion of the issues. Well, then all hell broke loose. And if you've been watching the media, you know the story. I mean, first of all, Trump was just lying out his ass, just saying one thing after another that wasn't true, just a flurry of lies that would have been difficult for anybody to be able to shoot down individually one at a time. And then meanwhile, Joe Biden, 81 years old, is up there losing his train of thought, looking confused, looking stunned, looking out of place, and looking, frankly, incompetent to be president of the United States. And I'm watching this whole thing, and why I had a glimmer of hope in the beginning, this debate quickly turned into a train wreck. And for me, I was watching it almost for entertainment reasons, because it was just such insanity, such the opposite of what we really need in our nation right now. I mean, Trump was saying BS like, Biden wants to increase your taxes by 4 times, which isn't true at all. I mean, frankly, the guy that wants to jack up prices radically is Trump with his tariffs. And then Trump was saying, the Democrats, they want to be able to have abortions after a child is born, which is just a flat out lie. And so Trump was lying, and he left lying right one after another. And then meanwhile, Biden was too weak, too incompetent, too frail to shoot down those lies effectively. And Trump noticed this. And meanwhile, the moderators weren't addressing this. They weren't fact checking. They weren't pushing back. And that was part of the rules that Trump and Biden agreed to. So Trump is getting away with lying. And so what does he do? He starts lying even more and amplifying the lies and just doubling down on the lies. And then meanwhile, Biden is on the other side of the stage, bumbling, fumbling, trying to get out a coherent message. And there were a few moments where it was downright scary. Like you didn't know if Joe Biden is capable of being the president of the United States, the so-called, quote, leader of the free world, a guy with his finger on the nuclear bombs, a guy that has tremendous power in America. And after this debate, oh my God, the debate itself, you got to say who won, who lost. Well, Biden clearly lost. I mean, he was like a deer in the headlights. He looked pale. He looked really bad. And he couldn't speak coherently in many portions of the debate, especially in the beginning. But Trump, while he looked like a leader, looked confident, he was lying so much. He was being a con man, as Trump normally always is. So you come out of this thing, you're just like, who won? Well, they were both disasters. And, going into that debate, I did a preview of the debate last week, and I said, we need more than these 2 choices. We need 3 and 4 choices on the debate stage. And sure enough, we got 2 choices, and they're 2 really bad choices. And people say, well, you got to pick between the lesser of evils. Do you want evil in red or evil in blue? Do you want the immoral candidate from the Republican Party or the one from the Democratic Party? And is this what it all comes down to, America? These are our 2 best options for president of the United States? You got to be kidding me. Now, I'm no supporter of RFK, but RFK should have been on that stage just to offer a third point of view. And yeah, there's a lot of problems with RFK, but he could at least speak clearly, even with his voice impediment. He has different perspectives on issues, and I think the conversation would have been a lot different. And there are other candidates that are also running for this. But, when they did this debate, they did it purposely to block all the competition. They said that RFK couldn't be in the debate because he hadn't qualified on enough ballots to get 270 electoral votes. But meanwhile, Biden and Trump aren't on any ballots. Neither one of them is qualified for the ballot because neither one of them is the nominee of their party. They said RFK couldn't be in the debates because he wasn't ranking high enough in the polls, but many of those polls left RFK out of the question. They would just ask, who do you support, Trump or Biden? They wouldn't even ask RFK as one of the options. And then RFK doesn't get enough traction in the polls. Well, it's because they rigged the system. And I was just the whole time thinking, okay, I'm a political nerd, so I'm kind of into it. This is turning into a train wreck. This is turning into something crazy. And the whole time I'm thinking there's got to be more than two choices. I mean, you go everywhere in America, we have unlimited choices of what to wear, where to live, how to live our life and our hobbies. And when we go shopping, it's unlimited choices in almost every category, except President of the United States when we're forced to get two turkeys. And boy, was that debate ugly. Then what happened after that? Well, I was watching CNN and, they had their big panel. I think there were like 9 people up there. And Van Jones was one of those panelists who was he on President Obama's staff or President Biden's staff? I think he was on Obama's staff. And he's a regular on CNN. He's clearly a Democrat, not a hardcore lefty, more of a centrist Democrat. And Van Jones said that Biden is not capable of being president and the Democrats need to consider a new candidate. And I thought to myself, oh, that's something pretty bold to say. It's like he was just speaking top of mind. But once you break the ice on that particular issue, it just starts building, and it's still building. Should Biden be the candidate from the Democrats? And we're still hearing this in the media today, a week later. We're seeing it in the White House press conferences where Biden's press secretary is just getting hammered about his competence, his ability to lead, whether he's going to stay in the race. We're seeing comments now from the Democratic National Committee on what the process might be to replace him. I mean, what do you think? Is he going to be replaced? Now, I am shocked that the Democrats are sticking with Biden on this, because Democrats are rightfully saying that we are facing an election that is extremely threatening to the core principles of America. Electing Donald Trump is dangerous for America. This is a guy that is above the law, wants to rule, for retribution, wants to eliminate parts of the Constitution, wants to rule as a dictator on day one. He said that. And there's a whole million other reasons why Trump is a very immoral, improper candidate for America. So when Democrats are facing a Republican challenger who is as scary, as threatening, as dangerous as Donald Trump, why in the hell are they rolling out Joe Biden, who's 81 years old, who stumbles and bumbles, who got tongue-tied and couldn't express, his thoughts during the debate, who trips and falls, and who is clearly showing decline? Say what you will about Joe Biden and his career, et cetera, but, should he be president of the United States? Should he have, some would say, the hardest job in the world? Does he have the mental capacity, the acuity, the stamina to do that job? Regardless of how you feel about his policies. And to me, the answer is clearly no. So now there's a lot of people are saying, well, I might have been on the fence, but there's no way I can vote for Biden, so I'm just going to now vote for Trump. And what did we see? We're seeing Trump rise in the polls, even though he lied out of his ass in that debate, because all the attention is going to Biden and his capabilities. I'm just stunned that the Democrats are so strongly sticking with him. Now, given the fact that the media is still pushing this narrative, still questioning what the president is doing, still challenging, his competence. Why isn't he in a press conference? Why isn't he demonstrating his mental capabilities, showing how sharp he is? We hear the stories, in closed doors, and we've been in meetings, and man, Biden is the sharpest guy in the room. He's got lots of energy, but we didn't see that in the debate. Makes me even wonder if really that's what we're seeing behind closed doors. Other people say, well, it really doesn't matter because Joe Biden surrounds himself with a lot of really smart people, a lot of experts, people that we can count on. Trump surrounds himself with crooks and liars and a bunch of guys that we don't like. Okay, but even if you're surrounding yourself with really good, smart people, as president, you have to make the big decision. You have to be the number one. You have to be able to make the tough call. And I'm not sure Joe Biden has the ability to do that anymore. So now what do? If they decide to run someone else, whether it's Vice President Harris or it's someone else, I mean, we can come up with any number of names. If they admitted that President Biden is not going to run for re-election, well, then does he have the mental capacity to be president of the United States from now until January of next year, up until inauguration day for the next president? So I think if the Democrats admit that he's not capable of running for president for another term, I don't think you can make the argument he should be president now, which then leads us back to Kamala Harris. Some people are saying, hey, Kamala Harris, maybe not a bad narrative, a former prosecutor going up against Trump. But Kamala Harris is not a candidate of strength. I mean, she was chosen for that job largely to check a few boxes in the world of demographics and underrepresented categories. Kamala Harris has a legitimate track record, a legitimate history as a prosecutor, as an attorney general, as a senator. But let's be real. I mean, she is not the sharpest tool in the kitchen. She is, a vice president, but as president, I think a lot of people would be very concerned. So now I'm wondering, what are the Democrats going to do? My hunch is that this narrative in the media is going to keep going and keep building, and at some point, they're going to have to make a tough call and ask Biden to step down. I mean, imagine if they stuck with Biden and they lost to Trump. I mean, that would be a disaster of epic proportions, even though there are a lot of very capable Democrats that could step in and probably clean Trump's clock. I remember Amy Klobuchar in the Democratic debates in 2020. I thought she did a really good job. There were other Democratic candidates in those debates that I thought, are certainly competent mentally to do it, whether or not I agree with their policies. But even some of them I thought showed reasonable amounts of intelligence and thoughtfulness. But I don't think we're going to get that with President Biden. And meanwhile, President Trump, I mean, this guy is a con man. He's a liar, a scammer. And I mean, it's shocking the Republicans are sticking with him. And meanwhile, now we're seeing more reports coming out that, of Trump with Epstein over at Lolita Island, hooking up with underage girls. We're seeing more receipts of this, and still the evangelicals are sticking with Trump. This is a guy that has violated probably every one of the 10 commandments, and they're sticking with Trump. I mean, it's hilarious. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. Republicans said they wanted to put dignity back into the White House when they elected George W. Bush in 2000, because, President Bill Clinton was a disgrace and he was immoral. The whole Monica Lewinsky affair, yada, yada. But that's small potatoes compared to everything that Trump is involved in. And yet the evangelicals are sticking with Trump and they pray for him. What in the hell is going on here? How did we get reduced to this? Tell me your thoughts. I mean, in my opinion, it is outright immoral for the Democrats to stick with Biden, considering how dangerous Trump is. And it's outright immoral that the Republicans are sticking with Trump, given that he is lying and scamming people. And you see a lot of other politicians kind of jumping on board with him, like Burgum, the governor from North Dakota, like Marco Rubio, like Ted Cruz, guys that Trump has shredded, has talked down to, has obliterated in debates. Now these guys are sucking up to Trump and getting in line, hoping to be his vice president. And just they're willfully in denial of all of his lies. And meanwhile, the Democrats are willfully in denial of Biden's capability and mental acuity and stamina to be president. This is insane for the strongest nation on the planet. How in the hell do we end up with this? This is just blows my mind. The whole thing just completely blows my mind. So let me know your thoughts and comments. Is there going to be another debate? There's supposed to be another debate, but who knows who's going to be there? Like I said, I think RFK should have been on that debate stage. I think there are other candidates, the nominee from some of the other parties, like the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, if they have qualified on enough ballots to mathematically get to 270, then I think they deserve to be on that debate stage. America, the land of unlimited choices, the land of diversity, and we get two total turds being offered to us as president of the United States. So tell me what you think about the debate. Okay. What are we going to do next? I want to talk a little bit about some of the Supreme Court cases, and then we're going to chat a little bit about Independence Day and some of my thoughts and memories of Independence Day, and I look forward to sharing yours. And then we're going to open up the San Diego Community Forum. We got some social media comments that we're going to respond to. Okay, let's talk about the Supreme Court. And this has probably been, this whole week has been insane, hasn't it? The past 7 to 10 days. If it wasn't all these different Supreme Court cases, it was the debate and whether Biden was going to stick in the election and all these different things. So let's talk about some of these cases. Now, the first one, the one that has gotten probably the most attention, is the presidential immunity. The Supreme Court ruled that a president has immunity, which means that they can break the law with no consequences as long as they are doing it as an official act. If they're acting as a private individual, they are still held accountable to the law. But if they're president of the United States, they can break the law and suffer no penalty. What do you think of this? This, to me, is the most anti-American sentiment that I've seen from the court in a long, long time. In fact, even Alito and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, a lot of those guys, when they were being interviewed in the Senate hearings for the judicial nomination, many of those Supreme Court justices said then during their interview process that nobody is above the law, that we are all held equal to the law. And now, once they're in their Supreme Court position, they are now saying, nope, a president can be like a king. A president can unilaterally make decisions, and it doesn't matter if they kill people or they harm people or they violate the law. If it's part of their job as president, then that's acceptable. Now, they voted 6-3. The court is stacked with conservatives that Trump put in. And now we're bearing the fruits of this. Now, the Supreme Court, a lot of these cases are, again, it's like a mixed bag. There's some that I really like and some that I don't. This is one that I really don't like. The whole idea of the notion of having our own inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The implication there is that we have equal rights. All of us are equal. It says that in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. And what that really means is that we're all equal in the eyes of the law. Some might say we're all equal in the eyes of God, which essentially means that those God-given rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, are for everybody. But what we're seeing now is that the Supreme Court says that a president of the United States can violate someone else's right to their life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness just because they're president. And this isn't, this is obviously scary, assuming a Trump presidency, but this sort of thing's been going on for a long time. We've seen President Obama drop drone bombs and has killed innocent people. He bombed a Doctors Without Borders facility in Afghanistan. He drone bombed a wedding. Some of these were American citizens that they were attempting to hold accountable the law. Every one of them deserves habeas corpus rights, but instead the president just had them killed in the Middle East. Obama did that. And so we're seeing this sort of thing playing out, that presidents are above the law. It's not just a recent thing. It's not just a Trump thing, but it's a thing that's been going on for a while. But is that right? Should a president have immunity? If this is supposed to be a nation of the people, by the people, for the people, the person that's acting as president isn't supposed to be a king, isn't supposed to be a dictator. They're a representative of the people who are meant to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Well, how in the hell can they do that by being above the law? So this, I thought, was horrible. It also invites the question about immunity. There was a lot of discussion about this back in 2020 during all the George Floyd cases about police immunity and qualified immunity for cops. Should police have immunity? Should police be able to get away with breaking the law if it's in the course of their regular duties of their job? This was a controversial point, particularly when it pertained to George Floyd and whether that policeman that, basically suffocated him on the middle of the street, whether that he should have been tried for murder or not. But in a lot of cases, some of these cops are immune to being charged for murder. In some cases, that veil is pierced where they can sometimes hold police accountable. But again, it goes to the fact is who should be above the law, and are we all equal before the law? So this was a big problem from the Supreme Court, is granting immunity to the President of the United States. Because who can say what's an official act? What's official, what's unofficial? It becomes subjective. And as a result, you're going to end up having this whole thing spinned and warped, and you're going to have alternative facts and lies driving all of this. Okay, the other topic that I think the Supreme Court did that's worth mention is the Chevron case. I know, does this have any connection to Chevron, the oil company? It must. I don't know. But the story is that in 1984, the Supreme Court ruled that judges aren't capable of being experts in all these different categories of the economy and society, and that they were deferring a lot of deferring a lot of the decision making to experts in the regulatory state, in the EPA or in the Security and Exchange Commission, all of those alphabet agencies that all report to the president, all in the executive branch. They basically said, when Congress writes a law that's kind of vague, then we're going to let these regulators, these experts, these PhDs and scientists let them be the ones that can define it more specifically. Now, on the surface, that might sound reasonable, right? Who are these judges? How does a judge know how many pollutants there are in any, cubic meter of space, and what's the right number of particulates to measure pollution? Judges aren't going to know that. The experts know that. And no one can be an expert in everything. The Supreme Court, they know the law, but they're not going to be an expert in science. They're not going to be an expert in health. They're not going to be an expert on finance and other parts of the economy. So it sort of sounds right. Okay, but so what happened since 1984? We've seen the executive branch grow and grow and grow. More and more people, bigger and bigger agencies, giving the President of the United States more and more power. And as a result, now we have these unelected bureaucrats that work in these alphabet agencies that are making laws, that are making rules. Interestingly, they're making rules that govern their own behavior. It's like a conflict of interest. Because remember, it used to be that the Congress, the legislative branch, would write the law. The executive branch would enforce the law. And if the law ever needed interpreting, that's what the judicial branch was for. But now the judicial branch has basically kicked that can partly to the executive branch to let them interpret the law, so the executive branch can define all the rules about the scope of the executive branch's own authority. Is that right? It's just like it's the previous Chevron case, in my opinion, distorted the balances of power. Revoking it kind of puts it back to the right, three co-equal branches of government. I think that's a good thing. But it makes you wonder, like, a lot of these individuals that are in the regulatory state, they're not accountable. They're appointed by politicians. Some have political leanings one way or the other. I mean, you might think it's a great idea to have experts in the executive branch make all these decisions, but maybe only if it's your team that's running the nation, that's the president of the United States. I mean, can you imagine Democrats really excited if Trump and his con man and people with alternative facts and lies were the ones that were making these rules? I would hope not. I would hope not. So how did this whole thing come about? Apparently, there were some fishermen, and they were being told by one of the regulatory agencies, I don't know, Fish and Game, one of them, that said, well, in order for you to go fishing, you have to bring a federal regulator onto your boat, and you have to pay them $700 a day to monitor what you fish. And they were saying, what the hell is this? This is an abuse of power. This is nonsense. You know, you can inspect my fish when I come off the boat, but I shouldn't have to pay you $700 a day just so you can monitor me and tell me what I can and cannot do. And so that's the case that was brought forward. But there's been a lot of other things, like especially during COVID, we saw so many decrees by the regulatory state. A great example was the eviction moratorium during COVID. We saw regulators who claimed they were trying to control the disease and the spread of the disease, and they took that circumstance and said, well, now we're going to let people stay in their apartments even if they don't pay the rent. And, you know, the landlord, you know, maybe we'll be able to give them some relief in a PPP loan or something, but, you know, they don't have control of this. They can't evict their tenants, even though the lease might be over, they're month to month. Maybe they're a bad tenant, a tenant not paying their bills. And now the landlord has no ability to manage their own property. Was this something that Congress voted on? No, it wasn't. It was done by administrators, done by regulators. And this is an example of how the administrative state has grown and grown. You know, it kind of reminds me also of, you remember Ben Sasse? Ben Sasse used to be the Republican senator from Nebraska. I think he's now president of the University of Florida. And I remember he said, he goes, oh, back when I was a kid, I used to watch cartoons on Saturday morning and they had Schoolhouse Rock, you know, and it was, I'm just a Bill. I remember, you know, all those things we learned when we were younger, you know, speaking to people that are, you know, my age, Gen X. And we learned that the way a bill is processed, you know, it's submitted in Congress and it has to go through committee and they vote on it. And then the president signs off on it. And if it requires interpretation, it goes to the judges, to the Supreme Court. We knew back then that, you know, back in the day, the Congress was the politically electrified branch of government. That's where there was debate, vigorous debate on the House floor. This is where there were elections a lot more frequently. You know, the legislative branch was the highly politicized branch. And then it used to be that the executive branch had a very modest amount of power. They had limited power. And then the judicial branch was almost like something that, you know, most people didn't really think about unless there was a really big, important case. But now everything's changed. Congress has abdicated a lot of their authority, and they just let the president make decisions using executive orders and using the administrative state. So the legislative branch has become weaker. The executive branch, since the 80s, has become bigger and stronger. And now the most electrified, politicized branch in the government is the Supreme Court. We're seeing it now. We saw it with the nominations that have been going back, probably going back as far back as Bork in the late 80s. So it's crazy how everything is shifted, and how the original design of way America's government was supposed to be set up is completely warped, completely distorted. And that's leading us to why we are where we are. And now the progressives want to, you know, stack the court. They want to make the court bigger. Rather than 9 justices, they want 13 or they want 17, so they can put more progressives on the court. But then what's going to happen is that at some point, then the Republicans are going to put more conservatives on the court. And it's the same volley that's going to be going back and forth forever. But yeah, some of these cases are consequential. There's one other case that from the Supreme Court that actually has a big impact here locally, and it had to do with the homelessness. And basically, the Supreme Court said that cities can make their own decisions on whether or not they want to arrest the homeless or move the homeless, that sort of thing. And a lot of people were really upset, like, oh my God, where are these people going to go? What can they do? The homeless have nowhere to go. And now this evil Supreme Court is saying being homeless is illegal and they're going to throw you in jail for it. But it's hard. I mean, homelessness is a very complicated problem. And homeless people, there needs to be a place for them to go. And I think that's one of the rightful things the government can do is to create zones where people can camp overnight. I mean, it's horrible that we have so much homelessness in the first place. This goes back to the housing crisis in California that I commented on earlier. That's the main reason we have homelessness, is because housing has become too expensive and they can no longer afford to pay the bill. And then they become homeless. Are there other factors, mental health or drugs or alcohol? Yeah, those all play a role. But the main reason is that housing is too expensive. They can't afford it and they become homeless and they begin living out of their car, or they live in a tent, or they live somewhere else. We could solve this problem because you don't hear much about homelessness where housing's inexpensive. You don't hear about a huge homelessness crisis in Mississippi or in Missouri or in other states where you don't have insane housing prices. But in California, we do. And that's why we have so many homeless people. So this kind of opens the door up for a lot of cities. And I read an article recently that Escondido is now going to be able to have the power now to forcibly remove homelessness from parts of their city, in some cases to arrest them. Now, it's awful when homeless people are arrested. We don't want to see that. And some people would say that's inhumane. But at the same time, we can't just have homeless people, out on the streets. We can't have anarchy. So I would hope that local cities now would be able to create a zone where overnight camping is allowed. That also gives law enforcement the ability to keep an eye on it in a particularly central location. If resources need to be brought in to help the homelessness, then you have a central location for that. And then you have a lot less riffraff of homelessness scattered about, in some cases interfering with people's businesses, in other cases interfering with people's homes. And you could have a little bit more order to this. And frankly, it'd be a lot safer for the homeless if there was a zone. Now, the city of San Diego has set up parts of Balboa Park for homelessness. I think it's great. I mean, it sucks that there's homeless in the first place, and there's a lot of things that we need to do to resolve that. But right now, there's a homeless problem that needs to be addressed. Is Escondido now going to arrest people, put them in jail? I don't know. That's not going to solve the problem. What's Poway going to do? Right now, Poway, I don't think, has a homeless shelter. I don't know if they've forcibly removed anyone from homelessness in Poway. I know they have the authority to do it, but could they set up a place like in, if you go back to Gooden Ranch back there in the Sycamore Valley area of Poway, there's a big open space. There's a lot of places like that where they could set up a zone that's open for the homeless. What do you think of that? To make camping legal. And I think that would be a good short-term solution to this. But the Supreme Court has allowed that to occur. What do you think of that? Is that good? Is that bad? So we got this flurry of announcements, and it usually comes this time of the year. But the presidential immunity one was the one that drove everyone off the edge of a cliff, rightfully so, especially seeing what Trump has been saying about his candidacy and his plans once he's elected. He said straight up, I'm going to be a dictator on day one. And he doesn't back down from it at all. I mean, is that the kind of guy we want as president? And do we want a Supreme Court that's going to look the other way and give him immunity? That's dangerous, very dangerous. Okay, that's the Supreme Court. has implications here locally. I think this is interesting. The Chevron case, by the way, I am generally speaking in favor of what the Supreme Court did. So I don't like their immunity decision. I do like the Chevron decision. The homeless decision is a mixed reaction, but I think in the end, I think they made the right call. But what SCOTUS did to overturn Roe v. Wade was deplorable, was awful. And there's been a lot of other cases where this Supreme Court has made terrible decisions, largely due to its more conservative leaning now. And it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts, because what you have is the court going out there and actively violating people's individual rights, or allowing the violation of individual rights to be legal. Now, I'm hopeful that with the Chevron case, passing, we're going to begin to see a scaling down of the regulatory state. I'm not going to say the deep state, that's the MAGA conspiracy theorists, but I'm going to say there is a regulatory state that has grown and grown and grown, has gotten more and more power, and has enacted and created rules on its own, unilaterally. To the point now where, we could be committing all sorts of illegal acts and not even realize it, because there are so many rules that have been set up by so many experts that, frankly, you wonder, do these rules really need to exist in a so-called free nation? And by the way, if we go back, as it seems we are, we're going to go back to the original premise of the three co-equal branches of government, where the courts are the ones that interpret the rules. But the courts bring in experts as part of that process. So it's not like you're going to have a bunch of, religious people in robes making decisions unilaterally. I mean, they're going to be bringing in experts in a lot of these cases as well. Now, how are they going to rule? I mean, we can have a conversation about that. But I think it's good that the executive branch has become too powerful. And frankly, I think that's why politics has become so divisive with people in our communities and around the nation. It's because politicians, particularly the President of the United States, has so much power to affect people's lives, to make businesses a success or a failure, to make your life hell or heaven. They have so much power to manipulate society, to rig it for their friends and their donors, that's the reason why we have so many problems. So the relaxing of a lot of this power of the executive branch and restoring more power to the judicial, and frankly, telling the legislative branch, Congress, to do their damn job and put power back in their position would be helpful. But of course, representatives and senators, they abdicate. They don't want to make tough decisions. They don't want to have to vote on difficult bills. And they never have open debate. When's the last time you saw open debate on the House floor and in a healthy and vigorous amendment process? They never do that. They negotiate these things in backroom deals. They bring them forward. They'd only bring it forward until they know they've got the votes. And every one of those senators and representatives are given like a 2,000-page document that they got to read in 24 hours and vote on it. And all they care about is getting reelected and holding on to their power. And if they can avoid having to make a tough call, if they can avoid having to vote on a controversial bill and just say, well, let the president, he has a pen and a phone, as President Obama said, let them make the decision. What do you think of that? What are your thoughts? Okay, so that's the Supreme Court the Supreme Court issues. This has been a huge news. I mean, so tell me what you think. We've talked about the Supreme Court issues. We've talked about the presidential debates and the problems of both Trump and Biden. We've even talked a little bit about Poway Voices and the Poway Term Limits Initiative. So if you have any thoughts or comments on any of those issues, just type them in the live chat on Facebook, X, or on YouTube, and we'll get you involved in the San Diego Community Forum. Okay, I now want to talk about Independence Day. And this, in my opinion, the 4th of July has become my favorite holiday. A lot of people have Christmas as their favorite holiday. Some people love Halloween. But for me, Independence Day I've always have sort of the most warm, fuzzy memories of this. And the more that I understood about the founding values of America, are inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this notion that we're all equal under the law, these American values are what makes America great. And these were initially declared in the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Today is July 3rd, 2024. We're getting near our 250th anniversary. Isn't that amazing? It's going to be just in 2 years. So I wanted to share just some thoughts about Independence Day and what I remember as a kid, and maybe what do you remember about Independence Day, or you still really enjoy about it? So starting out, I remember as a kid, I was raised up in the Bay Area in a city called Burlingame. It's kind of near the San Francisco airport. And I remember back in the day, we actually, we would get fireworks from the Red Devil fireworks stand. And they had a number of these like in our city. There were like 2 or 3 of them that were in some shopping areas. And it was like a pop-up stand. And they would sell fireworks. And I remember as a kid, we get on our bicycle and we would just go look at the fireworks. We had no money. We were like, oh, that looks cool. That looks cool. I wish we should get that one, or tell my mom or dad to get that one. And then, of course, we ended up bringing them out, and we'd open up the kit. And, as a little kid, we couldn't touch it. We were sitting in a chair in the back watching. And I remember my family and other neighbors would light the fireworks in the middle of the street. And we had folding chairs either on our sidewalks or in some cases on the edge of the street. And we all enjoyed it together on our city block. And they were like these cones that would, they'd probably shoot 2 or 3 feet in the air with some sparkles and ooh, ah, and that sort of thing. And that was what I knew of the holidays of Independence Day. And I remember getting a little older, and I had cousins that had a cabin along the Russian River near Guerneville. And I remember going there as a kid, and I think they had fireworks celebrations that might have been in the city that were shot into the sky. And that was a big deal because I had never really seen that. Because for me, fireworks were like really low altitude. They were like, no taller than a 5 or 6 foot man. They were real small, low to the ground. Then I remember as a kid going to Utah, to Kearns, Utah, and spending a summer out there with my stepfather's parents. And Utah didn't allow fireworks, which I thought was amazing. And this is back in the 70s. And back then, they didn't have fireworks because they were afraid of fires. But what they did allow were sparklers and caps. Remember caps? That we would put them in the cap gun. It was like this red strip that had little circles with a bit of gunpowder on there. I assume it was gunpowder. And remember, we used to use a cap gun and we would shoot them. And then we would be able to tear those cap strips into individuals. And we had these things that looked like bombs that we could put a cap strip in, and we'd throw it in the air and it would land on its head. And then it would let out a big bang. And sometimes we put 2 or 3 slivers of paper, each with its own gunpowder, to make the bomb bigger. I remember as we got older and more brave, we would take the whole roll from the caps and then put it on the ground and then take a hammer and hit it just to create a big boom. And just some of the stupid, foolish things we did as kids. But it was interesting to me that in Salt Lake City, in Kearns, which was a suburb of Salt Lake, the whole state, you couldn't do fireworks. And then I remember getting closer to a teenager. Maybe I'm 11 or 12, and you start to see other kids in the neighborhood, and they have firecrackers. And you're like, ooh, where'd you get those firecrackers? And then they would get bottle rockets or M80s, and you'd find out that there's this whole underground economy of people buying and selling illegal fireworks. And I was just amazed by it. I was like, you can't go to the Red Devil stand that's, the little pop-up place that's on the street corner that's selling fireworks. You had to, you got these things. And I was like, where are they getting them from? And people were saying, oh yeah, I know a guy who knows a guy. And, it was like, you would buy them from people and you find out ways to get them. And some people had connections and other people didn't. And it sounded scary because it was all illegal and all black market. But it was nuts. Then I remember being 12 years old And that was 1776. No, wait, I was 11 years old in 1776. Remember that? That was the bicentennial. That was a big deal in America. That was our 200-year anniversary. So July 4th on the bicentennial was a big thing. You remember we had those bicentennial quarters? And there was a lot of other kind of, happy birthday America stuff throughout 1976. And that was pretty cool, especially on the 4th of July. Then I'm a little older, and I'm 16. And then this is when I found out, like, oh, I'm going to try to buy some of these illegal fireworks. And so I lived in Burlingame, which is about like 20 miles or so south of San Francisco. And everyone said, oh yeah, got to go to Chinatown, and that's where you can buy the fireworks. And I was thinking to myself, okay. And so I went with one of my friends, and we went up there. I just kind of wanted to see what this is about and maybe try to buy some. And it was funny. It was, you're walking around in Chinatown in San Francisco. And first of all, Chinatown in San Francisco is amazing. I mean, it's legit. I mean, it's like people from the old country that are there, and the shops are very ethnic. They're like the food stores, the clothing stores are all traditional Chinese goods that are being sold. And you would see like chickens like hanging, things that you would normally never see at an American grocery store. You'd see things in the Chinese grocery stores that were different. So for me as a 12-year-old, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so I'm walking around in Chinatown, and of course, I'm like 16-year-old kid, and I stand out like a sore thumb. I mean, I'm like this white kid from the suburbs walking around, kind of looking lost, looking confused in Chinatown. And sure enough, I get hit up by lots of different people, and they come up to me and they say, firecracker, firecracker, and it was almost like when you're in Las Vegas and you're walking on the street and people are trying to give you those cards for the girls to call, that sort of thing. It was like you were just getting hammered by people all asking, you want firecracker? You want fireworks? And finally I said yeah to one of them. And they brought me into this back alley, and they say, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, what can I get? And he says, well, about this, this, or that. And I said, okay, I'll have 2 of these, 3 of those, and 1 of those, whatever. It was kind of a small order. And I gave him the money, and he left. So here I am. I'm in San Francisco with my buddy. I don't know anyone. I just gave my money to some guy I don't know in a back alley, and he just disappeared. I mean, who knows? I mean, did I get ripped off? Is he going to come back? I don't know. And I know what I'm doing is illegal. And then sure enough, he shows up with a grocery bag full of stuff. And it was awesome. And everything he promised, he delivered on. And he made money, and I got fireworks, and we were happy. It was a trade. It was win-win. And granted, I didn't go buy the crazy stuff. Like I didn't buy M80s. I was just mostly interested in the firecrackers. I like the bottle rockets. Remember those where you'd be able to put them in a 7-Up bottle and shoot them up into the air? And then there was other ones, they called them jumping jacks. And they were like firecrackers, but they would spin and fly. And those could be a bit, you had to make sure you were real careful on where you lit those, because those could get away from you and cause some problems. But that's what we got. And I remember coming back, and I was like, everyone's like, oh my God, where did you get that? And told him the whole story. And I never went back and did it again. It was something. And then, by the way, then I came down to college, came down here to UCSD, and people in San Diego have been doing the same thing, but rather than going to Chinatown, they go to Tijuana, and they're ended up buying basically the same stuff. So it's just funny how in every community there is access to a lot of these black markets. Then I remember being here at UCSD and going to La Jolla Cove to watch the fireworks. And this was interesting because, my friends were all from Southern California because they were students with me in college, some from San Diego. And they say, oh yeah, we're going to go and watch the fireworks. And it was a big thing that everyone would go to a spot and watch fireworks. And I thought to myself, well, when I was growing up, we just had lawn chairs and we were just lighting up these Red Devil fireworks in our street. I've never thought of this as a big event where everyone goes and it becomes a big deal. And sure enough, that's what it was, and everyone's standing around going, ooh and ah. And it was the La Jolla Cove thing. And that was like, okay, this is different in Southern California than how I was raised. And then I remember probably the summer after my sophomore year in college, I was living in Pacific Beach. And then someone turned me on to the idea of Kate Sessions Park. Have you ever been up there? Kate Sessions Park is like on the side of Mount Soledad. And from there, you can get a view of the fireworks at the Pacific Beach Pier, the Ocean Beach Pier, from SeaWorld. I think from Old Town, you could see it, and maybe from Qualcomm Stadium. And all these fireworks shows were synchronized to the same music track that was being played on Kixie, KYXY. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. And by the way, Kate Sessions Park was a really neat park. I had been up there before for some event, some activity. And it's like this park that's like on the slope of the Mount Soledad. And so it's a natural amphitheater to watch the fireworks. And this was really a neat thing. And so that became my go-to place for fireworks for a while. Then I'm a parent, and I have my kids, and my kids played sports, and so we would go to baseball tournaments or softball tournaments, or we go to Padre games, and there was always fireworks or something like that going on, depending on the event and where we were. But again, fireworks were not something it was amateurs were doing. They were always done by professionals. They were always done, safely. They were always mindful of not starting fires because they didn't want a bunch of Yahoo individual people using them. And I just kind of got used to that as the thing. And so, I had no desire to go back and get any of the illegal fireworks or anything like that anymore, especially with the fire danger in Southern California. But it just was very different than when I was a kid. Then I live in Poway, and we moved to Poway in 96. And then in 07, we moved into our current home in Poway. And from our backyard, we can see, we're on the north side of the big Twin Peaks hill. And so from our backyard, we can sort of see over the top of the Twin Peaks hill in the direction of Rancho Bernardo High School. And when we moved here in 07, the fireworks from the Rancho Bernardo High, we could see clear as a bell because they would shoot up high enough where they went over the top of the hill. And we were able to get a really nice fireworks show from our backyard. And so I would bring my radio out there, and we would play Kixie FM, and we would watch the fireworks. And that was a big deal for a few years. But then, because of safety reasons, legit reasons, they started lowering the height of the fireworks at Rancho Bernardo High School till it got to the point where I couldn't see them at all. Now I'm lucky if I see a couple of glimmers of light that shoot up high enough over the hill. Usually I'm just getting the ambient light from when they explode and pop. And I still get a little bit of the ambient light from Poway High, but that's much further away. And so it's really, you can't really see those at all. But it changed. It's funny how it always changed, our perception of it. Then get this, this was incredible. Then this was like maybe around, I don't know, 2014-ish. Our family went, hooked up with another family friends of ours, and we got a houseboat in Flaming Gorge, Wyoming. Actually, Flaming Gorge is this reservoir that's on the border. The reservoir spans the border of Wyoming and Utah. And some friends of mine had gone there on a fishing trip a long time ago, and they raved about it and said it was so awesome. And we kind of had a hankering to do a houseboat trip. And so we went there, and we piled the kids in the Honda Odyssey, and we drove from San Diego all the way up there. And our friends in Northern California did the same, and we met out there. But what was amazing is that once we crossed the Utah border into Wyoming, like almost immediately, we started seeing signs for fireworks. And there were stores that were jam-packed of nothing but fireworks in Wyoming. And it was like I was going back to my days going into Chinatown, but rather than doing a deal in a back alley, I was doing my deal in a legitimate retail store that had shelves and shelves and shelves of every possible firework you could ever imagine. And I couldn't believe it. And I was trying to tell my kids, this is incredible. And I don't know if they really understood it, within the context of everything I grew up as a kid. But it was mind blowing to see that. And we ended up buying some fireworks there. So then we were on Flaming Gorge. I ended up shooting some of them and we had some fun with them and it was done safely. But that was something. And then we had some leftover fireworks that we didn't use. And I just had packed them in a bag and brought them back. And then I was here in Poway and I had some fireworks. I didn't know what to do with them. I was like, well, what do? I don't want to give them away because then someone's going to probably use them and cause a problem. I certainly don't want to light them anywhere near my home. So I ended up, every once in a while, I have to go into the Poway Business Park where there is a hazardous waste place where I go drop off old cans of paint and that sort of thing. I remember I brought them there. And I remember I gave them to one of the employees. I think they're all City of Poway employees. And I said, hey, I've also got these fireworks and you guys take them. And I remember their eyes lit up. So I'm pretty sure that somebody enjoyed those fireworks. They weren't just disposed of in a safe and sane method. So unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, what are your memories of Independence Day, of the 4th of July? Like I said, it's become my favorite holiday. I've got good summer vibes from it, especially as a kid growing up and even as an adult. I generally like summer more than any of the other seasons. I like the fact that it's America's birthday, which I think makes it special. And all the Americana tie-ins like baseball and Independence Day and fireworks, a lot of these things are linked together, things that I love. I'm a huge baseball guy, sports in general. And so people would often say, what's your favorite holiday? And usually it's Halloween or Christmas. Some people say Thanksgiving, but for me, it's been 4th of July. And then what's interesting is that when I started up this podcast, in the beginning, we were just interviewing political candidates here in our local community in Poway. And then after our election season was going on, I decided I'm going to talk about a lot of other things. And I kind of landed on this notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being the kind of the themes, what's the right word? The higher purpose of what this podcast is about. And I'm really glad I did. And we're all, and now it's the 4th of July or the day before. And so it kind of makes sense. Yuri Bolin on the live stream says, back in my youth, had to go to TJ to buy fireworks and then smuggle them back into the United States. Yeah, that's what a lot of people in San Diego seem to do back in the day. And and I go down to Avenue Revolucion. I remember doing that when I was in college, and that was wild. And yeah, there were fireworks there as well. But what are your memories of Independence Day? I mean, for you, was it like backyard barbecue kind of a vibe? Was it fireworks, whether at your house or at some public location? Were you traveling on the 4th of July, or did you go to an event like a ball game, or did you go to Kate Sessions Park, or do you ever go to La Jolla or to any of the piers? Did you go to Old Town or SeaWorld? I mean, how did you spend your Independence Day holidays? I'm curious to know. Okay. All right. So the last thing I want to do before we get into the San Diego Community Forum, and again, I welcome your thoughts and comments. If you got something to say, type it in the live chat on Facebook, on X, or on YouTube, and I'll get you involved. I was originally going to read the Declaration of Independence, the whole thing. And, granted, it's not that long. But I thought, that might be kind of boring. So I decided to just share a few excerpts from the Declaration of Independence, knowing that tomorrow is the 4th of July, when the Declaration of Independence was made official. Apparently it was written on and approved by July 2nd, I think, but they didn't get all the final approvals until the 4th. But the key one, the one that was is the preamble. Many of us memorized the preamble of the Declaration of Independence when we were children. But to me, this is a core American moral code that I think is perfect. It's dead on. And I kind of want to read the preamble. I want to break it down. So We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So think about that. I mean, let's break this down. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. I mean, it means they're obvious. These are truths that exist before government was created. And the fact that all men are created equal. Now, what does that mean? All created equal. Does it mean that we all should have equal outcomes? No. Does it mean we all should make the equal amount of money? No. Does it mean we all should have equal access to different things in society? No, not really. In fact, in a country that values liberty, we're going to have a lot of inequality. You hear a lot about this where, we have too much inequality, wealth inequality, income inequality, all these other versions of inequality or inequity. But in a nation where people are allowed to live their lives and pursue their careers, pursue their happiness, live their life according to their own values, there's going to be different outcomes. Some people are going to be pilots. Some people are going to be teachers. Some people are going to be artists. Some people could throw a fastball 98 miles an hour. Some people want to be a stay-at-home mom. Some people don't want to be a stay-at-home mom, and women that want to pursue a very vigorous career and they want to be able to have all the power and success and opportunities any man would. But in a nation that values freedom, inequality is a feature, not a bug. However, there are some categories where equality is necessary, and that's what's happened. They declare here in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Now, what does that mean? Okay, first of all men, they really mean all humans. Okay, it's not male versus female or trans or anything. They really mean all humans. Just like when Neil Armstrong said, "One small step for man, one step for man, large step for mankind," whatever he said. He's referring to humankind. So all men are created equal. It means all humans are created equal. Now, what does that mean, created equal? It means that we all have equal rights. We all have equal liberties. We all have equality under the law. We're going to all pursue our life in lots of different ways, but we should be treated equally by the government. In this case, the Declaration of Independence creating America. We should have equality under the law. And I think that is a huge philosophical idea that was groundbreaking in 1776, and today in 2024 is still a groundbreaking idea, because people don't want equal rights for others. They want women to be oppressed. They want immigrants to be oppressed. They don't want people coming here from certain countries. They don't want people having access to this or to buy that. Everyone wants to restrict someone else and prevent them from living their life and pursuing their own values. That's a problem. But in America, we should have equality under the law. That's what makes this SCOTUS decision giving presidents partial immunity so egregious, because it violates what America is supposed to be about in the first place, that we're created equal. But no, in this case, the president is above the law, according to SCOTUS. That's wrong. That's immoral. That's unethical. That's anti-American. Going further in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, that these truths are to be self-evident, that they are endowed by their creator. Okay, now, to some people, your creator is God. Other people think your creator, maybe you're not religious, but maybe you think of nature as being what created you. Humans and nature, we can procreate. But essentially it means that we have these truths that are self-evident, these inalienable rights. Those are by default built into us as humans. Government didn't invent the right. Some would say they're God-given rights. I wouldn't say that. I would just say it's obvious by looking at nature that we all have a right to our own life. We're all trying to survive and succeed and pursue our values, and we all have a right to live our own life. And this is something that is inalienable, can't be taken away, because it's the default setting that we are in charge of ourselves, that we own ourselves. So that among these are certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our right to our own life. That means we make decisions about our own life. Our life is ours. Our body is ours. Your body, your choice. It applies with abortion. It applies with vaccine mandates the same way. Your body, your choice, your life. You have an inalienable right to you, to your life. You have an inalienable right to liberty, which means you can make choices. In a free society, you should be able to make choices. You should be able to buy and sell and cooperate with others. And you should be able to live your life based on your own values, your own convictions, your own beliefs. You should be able to pursue your own happiness. This, again, a groundbreaking philosophical idea that I think the founding fathers of America got dead on perfect. Well, maybe with the exception of the created by their creator, because that's a debatable point. But the fact that we each own our own life is a huge deal, because prior to America, people were subjects of kings. People lived under dictators. People were lived under the rule of a lord in a feudal society. People didn't have a right to their own life. They were some version of a slave. They weren't allowed to own property, or they weren't allowed to do a lot of things in society by decree of a king, by some authority. And here in America, they're saying, no, everyone has a right to their own life in America. And this is a nation that is of the people, by the people, for the people. This is a huge experiment, a huge groundbreaking idea in the course of human civilization. It's what truly, in my opinion, makes America great. Never mind the fact that our Republican and Democratic friends are trying to find ways all the time to violate our rights to our own life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the founders, while they did get the philosophy right, the implementation of it has been checkered, has been problematic, and we still are not fully implemented. There were contradictions right out of the gate. There was slavery in America in 1776. Thomas Jefferson, who I think wrote this portion of the Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, was inspired by philosophers like John Locke and others. It goes all the way back to Aristotle. Those ideas that he rightfully wrote in the Declaration of Independence, he himself, Thomas Jefferson, was a violator because he himself owned slaves. Some people will say that the fact that our founding fathers owned slaves makes them, we should cancel them, that the founding fathers and the values they expressed in the founding of America, therefore, are immoral, flawed, wrong, because they were slave owners. Well, some of them were, but not all of them. But I would contend that they got it right philosophically. Now, over time, slavery was abolished, thankfully. Over time, women got the right to vote. Over time, we've had rights for LGBTQ. We have women have a right to choose on their own body. Until recently, the SCOTUS removed it from removed Roe v. Wade, which I thought was abysmal, was awful. Basically preventing a woman from a right to her own life. And we still have a lot of work to do. Some people say we need women's rights. We need LGBTQ rights. What we really need is equal rights. We need rights that we all have. We all should have equal rights. No one having more rights than another person. And so sometimes I think people get caught up in the idea that we need Black rights and Hispanic rights and women's rights and Christian rights. And to the point where we get so divvied up, so parsed, so fractionalized that we lose sight of the fact that really we should just all have the same rights, our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of us equally. There's still work to be done. I know the the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA. I thought there were parts of that were actually quite good, and I don't think they ever passed that as a constitutional amendment. That's just something I think should be re-explored, because we all deserve equal rights, and if we can create a constitutional amendment that will reinforce that, I think that can only be good. I'd have to go back and read the detail of the proposed ERA, but I know they were rallying back in the 70s to make that a constitutional amendment, and they didn't quite get enough. But I think that might be something worthy of pursuing in the future. What do you think? Now, there's a few other things I want to mention here because they conflict with what's going on in the real world today. Because if you read the Declaration of Independence, after the preamble and establishing our inalienable rights and consent of the governed and all of that, then they go into a list of issues where they were angry with King George III. And they were calling him out for this and that, and all using that as the basis to declare independence and basically say, F you, King George. But there are a couple of here that I think are worthy of mentioning because they're relevant today. One of them is objections to the king. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Essentially saying that the king ignored laws, that thought he was above the law. And what do we have here in America? The same thing. We have a presidential candidate in Trump that is a violator of the law, that doesn't think the law applies to him and thinks that he deserves immunity, while at the same time declaring himself the law and order president. Insane. The very reasons that America was fighting against England 250 years ago, we still have that problem today amongst American leaders that think they're above the law. One of the other objections to the king, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose of obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of the new appropriations of the land. So the king was preventing people from coming to America, from immigrating here. Sounds familiar, right? I mean, we got President Trump building this beautiful wall, and then we have Biden expanding the wall. We have Republicans that are demanding a stop to illegal immigration. And now we have a Democratic president that has taken executive order, anti-democratic executive order, to put further restrictions on immigration and to set quotas on the number of people that they will allow from any given country. Border walls, immigration restrictions is the exact opposite of our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Keep in mind that those rights don't just apply to Americans. They don't just apply to white men. They apply to everyone. That's why some people say they're God-created rights. That's why all men are created equal. People lose sight of this, that immigrants have a right to their own life too. But people want to prevent them from coming in, building walls, restricting them. They want to have mass deportation. All of that is anti-American, anti-Independence Day values. And in fact, they called out the King of England for that very same reason. Further, one of the objections to the king was for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Does that sound familiar? We have President Trump that has the tariffs and the trade wars. And then we have Biden doing trade wars as well. He just jacked up tariffs and a lot of other categories more than Trump. Biden has a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. And tariffs make products more expensive. In some cases, they ban imported products entirely. Baby formula is a great example of that. They won't let imported baby formula, or they'll only in limited quantities let baby formula in from European nations that have very good regulations to make sure that it's safe and clean and good for kids to eat. but they limit it today. And that's why we had a baby formula crisis a few years ago. And it got so bad that President Biden had to use the military to airlift baby formula back into America. So restrictions in trade, the American revolutionaries were angry with King George, and yet we're having the same problem now. We should, in a free society that reinforces our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we should have free trade. Buyers and sellers should be able to trade with one another without restrictions, without tariffs, without border walls. It's amazing that we still have this problem. There are certain forces in America that want to go in the opposite direction of freedom. And it's not just one party, it's both parties. In some cases, one party is worse. In other cases, the other party is worse. Then further goes on, objections from the king for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Well, guess who did that? Both President Trump and President Biden used their executive orders to increase tariffs. That wasn't passed by Congress. It didn't go through a democratic process. The President of the United States unilaterally used executive orders to increase taxes on tariffs. And who pays taxes on tariffs? Americans do. Not the Chinese, not the Vietnamese, not the Koreans or the Japanese or the Mexicans. Tariffs are taxes on American consumers. And especially they're taxes that are not by a democratic process. They are done by decree with a pen and a phone, by an executive order, by a president, without consent from the people. That was one of the objections of the King George of England in 1776. It's still a problem today in America. And then finally, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. So the founding fathers of America were angry at King George because King George was sending insurrectionists into America to cause trouble and try to take down this effort for independence. Sound familiar? January 6th, anyone? Where we have insurrection that is being fueled by Donald Trump that leads to people invading our capital and trying to essentially overturn an election by threatening to kill the vice president of the United States. So it's crazy to see this when you read the Declaration of Independence and see how the things that Americans 250 years ago were rightfully upset with from England, from their king, are problems that we're still seeing today from authoritarian leaders in America that want to be king. What do you think of that? You know, our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a flag I will stand on all day, every day. That doesn't mean necessarily that I approve of your decisions or approve of the way you choose to live your life or the choices you make or your version of happiness. But I will protect your right to do that, particularly if you don't harm anyone else or violate anyone else's rights in the process. That should be what America is all about, that we all have equal rights to our own life. And I think if people understood that, then we wouldn't have a housing crisis in San Diego, because then people would be able to build on their own land because it's their own life, their own property, and they're building on it. But instead, we have NIMBYs that are telling other people that you don't have a right to your own liberty. We, the people, have the right to overrule your ability to develop your own property. Some people wonder why I'm so outspoken on property rights. This is why. Because we have a right to our own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And right to property is an extension of our right to our own life. Because we use our property as a means of generating income or generating resources to live a good life. What are your thoughts on that? Let me know in the comments on Facebook, X, or on YouTube. Okay, we're at an hour 39. I'm going to now go to the San Diego Community Forum. And what I like to do is to respond to some social media comments. I think this makes good fodder for the podcast. And so let's go here, and we're going to start with Joel Liska. responding to my video, or my short video about pay your fair share. Remember, this is the one where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are saying the rich need to pay their fair share, the corporations need to pay their fair share, but they never define it. It's this undefinable thing that they use as a political weapon. And when you try to ask people, well, what is my fair share? What is Elon Musk's fair share? No one can specify it. Everyone's got a different opinion. So to me, it's the most irrational of all political arguments. And it's definitely worthy of challenging. And that's what I did in that video. Well, Joel wrote back and he said, well, when Reagan took office, the wealthy and corporations paid around 70% in taxes. By the time he left office, they paid around 29%. Okay, now hold that thought. After I read this, I'm going to explain that that's not true. And I'm going to show you why. Joel goes on to say, read that again. Okay, I'm going to read it again. When Reagan took office, the wealthy and corporations paid around 70% in taxes. By the time he left office, they paid around 29%. Read that again. During his second term, banks merged their commercial and private banking systems, thus making it easier for the wealthy and corporations to shift assets in ways to hide their actual net values. Okay. That didn't happen under Reagan. That happened under Clinton, but I digress. With stock buybacks becoming the rage towards compensation packages, top execs acquired non-taxable incomes and the corporations increased their holding values. Hence, capital gains. Capital gains is where the top earners, in quotes, earners, can be and should be taxed. 35% flat after $10 million from total accrued earnings would put an end to the abuse. Then again, outlawing stock buybacks would do the same. What has Musk done to earn a $56 billion compensation package? Okay, so there's a lot in there, right? Okay, first of all, we know, you must have heard all the rhetoric that the rich need to pay their fair share. The rich don't pay any taxes. They're getting away with it. You know, my secretary pays, that's what Warren Buffett says, my secretary pays higher taxes than a billionaire. That's a bunch of crap too. Now, do some billionaires pay a lower percentage of their income in taxes than his secretary does? Yeah, that could be true in some cases. But still, billionaires pay a ton in total dollars. And frankly, the fact that different people pay different rates is an example of how the whole income tax system is screwed in the first place. It's the exact opposite of equality under the law. It's inequality under the law by design, not just with different rates for different people, but different deductions and withholdings and shelters for different people and different industries and different circumstances. The exact opposite of inequality before the law. But let's go back to this point. When Reagan took office, the wealthy and corporations paid around 70% in taxes. By the time he left, they paid around 29%. Okay, let's break that down. If you look at the highest marginal tax rate, that's true. Okay, which means that, we have a progressive income tax code, and each chunk of money you earn has a different tax rate. Typically, the more you earn, the higher your percentage tax rate is. And remember, back in the days of Eisenhower, the highest tax bracket, I think, got as high as 92%, which is just insane. That's like almost perfect theft. But they never paid 92% on all their income. It was just only on that portion that was above some big number, above 2 million or whatever it was back in the 1950s. Now, when Reagan became president, there were already some tax cuts that were implemented by Kennedy and perhaps by some of the other presidents in the 60s and 70s, to the point where the highest marginal tax rate when Reagan was president was 70%. But no one paid 70%. First of all, that only applied at the highest portion of your taxes based on the marginal tax system. But at the same time, there were so many deductions and so many loopholes and so many tax shelters that no one paid that amount, that the net amount was way less than that. So what was the net amount? Well, here I have a chart I want to share with you. So this shows what the effective tax rate is on the top 1% of households going back in history. Now, this is whatever the marginal tax rates were, minus all the deductions, and then net, what's their percentage in tax? And you can see in the 1950s, people paid about 42, this is the top 1% overall, paid about 42% of their income in taxes. And as we see, we get into the 1980s, and they were paying, in the 30s, maybe not as high as 42, but in the 30% range. And then in the late 80s, it got lower. It got into the lower 30%, like between 30 and 35. But then eventually Reagan started increasing taxes again on the rich. He cut them and then he raised them again, but net, he cut them more. But the point is that no one was being taxed 70%. No one was being taxed 92% back when Reagan was president, or when Eisenhower was president, because of all the loopholes and all the exceptions and all the different rules for different people and picking winners and losers that's built into the IRS tax code. So this is a trope that keeps getting rolled out all the time. Oh, the rich used to pay 92% in the 1950s, and back then we only needed one income, and we were able to support a family of four, and it wasn't a problem. And that was because the rich paid their fair share, 92%. No, they didn't pay 92%. They didn't pay 70%. But Reagan did cut taxes. And then he says, during his second term, banks merged their commercial and private banking systems, thus making it easier for the wealthy and corporations to shift assets in ways to hide their actual net values. Well, that was, what was the name of that bill? That was I think it was Glass-Steagall, that was in the 1990s, where there was a law that said commercial banks and investment banks had to be separate. A commercial bank was where we would go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo or a savings and loan or whatever it was, where we would have checking accounts and savings accounts and maybe a home mortgage, that sort of thing. And then there was investment banking that really catered to like these acquisitions and mergers, and was a much bigger deal in the world of Wall Street. And those were meant to be separate. Like one bank, like Wells Fargo, couldn't be in both. They couldn't be doing commercial banking and investment banking. Glass-Steagall was repealed, I think, in 97 when President Bill Clinton. And some people say that that's the reason why we had the Great Recession 11 years later in 2008. But what's an interesting fact about that is even back in the 90s, there was almost no banks that were doing both. Most banks were in one category or another. I mean, Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, what's the other one? Goldman Sachs. I mean, they were all investment banks, and they didn't monkey around with commercial banking. And then meanwhile, there were commercial banks like a B of A and a Wells Fargo and that sort of thing that didn't really do investment banking. Now, there was one exception. Washington Mutual, but it wasn't an exception, but Washington Mutual was an example of a company or of a bank that was a a commercial bank that went under. But they weren't doing investment banking in the Great Recession. The only one I can think of a bank that did both was Citibank. And Citibank failed over and over again and kept getting bailed out over and over again. And there was the one exception to the rule. Okay, so is that the reason why the rich are richer? I don't think it is. And he goes on to say, with stock buybacks becoming the rage, yada, yada. I remember back in the Great Recession, in the throes of it, corporations were sitting on large stockpiles of cash. And they were afraid to invest it in their companies because the economy was so screwed up. And so they just sat on that money. And people were criticizing, especially our friends on the left, were criticizing corporations from sitting on all that money, all that cash. Well, when companies are buying their stock back, what are they doing? First of all, they're liquidating all that cash. They're buying the stock back. Okay. And who's getting all that money? Well, the people that own the stock. Okay. And those could be, mutual funds and Wall Street companies that, are traders, but it could be you or me that might happen to have some of that on our 401k, on our pension, or maybe we own stocks individually. So when companies are doing stock buybacks, it's not some nefarious scheme. I mean, what they're doing is they're making a bet on themselves by buying the stock. Now, by buying the stock, they're also taking a lot of stock out of circulation to try to artificially increase the value of their stock and using that as a way to help pay off executives. But that's their mission as a business. They have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder earnings. And high stock prices is what the corporation exists for in the first place. So again, so many of these distortions. And then finally, he says at the bottom, like, what has Musk done to earn a $56 billion compensation package? Well, the board and the shareholders at Tesla agreed to that. They said, if you got our stock price above a certain level, you will make this amount of money. And the stock price got above that level. So what did he do to earn it? He did it by increasing the value of the company. He did exactly what a corporation should be doing. That in itself is basics of capitalism. Now, I will say this, that the value of Tesla is artificially enhanced because they get so much damn corporate welfare in the form of subsidies, either for the purchase of EVs, which mea culpa, we own two, or in the subsidies for solar, mea culpa, we have solar. And, or in the case of, the buying and selling of carbon credits, which is the biggest source of profit for Tesla. But see, that's all rent seeking. That's all manipulating the way the government works to maximize shareholder value, which is a rigged economy, which is the exact opposite of a free economy. And you know which one I support. Okay, let's move on. Let's go on to this next topic. Also about my fair share comment. This one was from Chris Rock. And he says, the answer you are looking for doesn't exist because fair is subjective. You also know that politics is mostly rhetoric, and the fair share argument is quite compelling, as you probably have discovered, since you don't address the actual issue behind the argument. Instead, you want fair to be defined for you, and anything other than that exact definition isn't enough. The problem is that rich do not pay enough, and sometimes they don't pay at all. Okay, well, if we're going to have an objective set of laws, if we're going to talk using reason and rationality, we have to have definable terms. And if you're going to say someone needs to pay their fair share, you need to explain to me what that is and why it's fair and why it's their share. So, yeah, of course it's not defined. It's become subjective. And that's how politicians are using subjectivity to twist the arms of people, because they know if they use objective criteria, which we should do as rational individuals, then they know they get exposed. Because what they want, when you look at the data and look at the numbers, is they want different people to pay different amounts, different rates, different percentages, different carve-outs and withholdings and tax shelters for different people and different special interests. And they call that fair share. What do you think? I think you can make an argument, maybe, that a flat tax is a fair share, that everyone paid the same percentage with no deductions, not even home mortgage deduction. But still, is that really fair? That they're making you pay to subsidize corporations and to bail them out? That they're making you pay to build a big, beautiful border wall that you disagree with? Is that fair? I think we can argue that as well. The whole fair share concept, I just is so ripe for attack, and you can count on me for keep coming after it. And finally, in the San Diego Community Forum, we got one more comment. This is from Sean. And we were talking about President Trump and his plan to eliminate income tax and replace it with tariffs. In this case, radically increase tariffs. And Sean goes on to say, tariffs are just a sales tax. I'm all for it. Tariffs hit your spending, not your earning. Bring them on. Okay. Are tariffs a sales tax? Sorta, right? I mean, they are applied to goods that people pay when you buy the good. The difference is that tariffs are only applied for political reasons, to protect certain industries. That's why Biden has a 100% tariff on electric vehicles from China, because he wants to protect American companies and their high prices. But he doesn't have a 100% tariff on other things. So it's winners and losers, different industries, different people, different products, all with different rates. And then some central planner, some expert in the executive branch, some regulator is the one that ends up deciding what that rate should be in a totally undemocratic fashion. So tariffs aren't a sales tax. I mean, at least a sales tax, with some exceptions, is applied equally. I mean, there are obviously some products and things that are immune, to use immunity again, that are immune from a sales tax. And tariffs do hit your spending, which is good. Now, do you believe that first of all, this is a trial balloon by Trump, something that he threw out there, seeing if it would get any traction. First of all, do you believe him? The guy's a con man. There's no way he's going to do this. But even if there was a proposal to replace the income tax and instead radically ramp up tariffs, and you assume the tariffs are increased so high to the point that that's what funds our entire federal government. And people will say, well, that's the way we used to do it before 1913, before we had a federal income tax. Well, back then, the federal government was about 2 or 3% of the national GDP, and now it's like 40%. So in order to fund the federal government entirely with tariffs, we would be paying huge prices on some goods, but not others. And central planners would be the ones picking the winners and losers, deciding which products have which tariffs and of which level. And so we would be impacted unequally based on that, the opposite of equality under the law. Now, the fact that there's a tax associated with spending rather than earning, I think it's better to tax spending than earning, in my opinion. But still, to do it this way would be outrageous. And on top of it, I don't believe they'd ever do it. Even if they ever radically increase tariffs to fund the federal government, there is no way they're going to repeal the income tax. We would just get stuck with both. And then there would be further distortions in the economy and further problems. So tell me what you think. Okay. Hour and 57 minutes, and we're kind of holding a pretty solid live stream audience. Thanks for all of you that are watching or listening on the live stream on Facebook, X, or YouTube. I'll be posting this to all the popular podcast platforms later today. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. Plus, of course, on YouTube. And then I will be breaking this into some segments and sharing those videos with you as well. But I encourage your thoughts and comments. If you want to learn more, you can go to my website, johnrileyproject.com. If you would like to be a guest, I welcome guests here to have a civil conversation on the issues. You may agree with me or disagree with me, but if you want to talk about it in a live stream podcast, let me know. Go to my website, johnrileyproject.com, or just send me an email to john@johnrileyproject.com. And there is an open invitation for any political candidate, where you're running for city council, school board, dog catcher, president of the United States, governor, mayor of San Diego, whatever it is. If you're running for political office and you want to have a long form interview, contact me. And we'll sit down for an hour or 2 hours and we'll go through your whole campaign platform. We'll talk it all through. And, for candidates, you're lucky if you can get a 15-second blip in the TV news. You're lucky if you can get a 1 or 2 sentences in the local newspaper. Here, you'll be able to speak unfiltered and answer questions, not just from me, but from our live audience. So if you're a political candidate and, the local political season is about to really start getting going, just reach out to me at my website, johnrileyproject.com, and we'll get you involved. Okay, friends, This concludes this episode of the John Riley Project, episode number 336. I'm on my way to 1,000. I've got about 660 or so more to go. So thanks again for being with me. Have a great day out there. And for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is John Riley. Be well out there.